Hello, my dearest comrades. Welcome to the Deep Dive, a program I am doing from now on. We've been hovering back and forth, deciding different names. This was the one that our design team suggested. But anyways, today we're going to be covering a wide array of topics, anything from news to philosophy, theory, political economy. I'm going to speak a little bit about the Paradise movie. It's a dystopian anti-capitalist gem that went right under everyone's noses. It's a German movie, so perhaps that's why I got to see it in Spanish. But it came out last year and it was excellent. I just recently wrote a review of it for both the Institute's website and my Substack. I'm also going to be discussing Sean Fain and the UAW's recent comments on Dr. Martin Luther King. We're going to be assessing, how this fits into the current militant labor movement, and also thinking about the legacy of King and the civil rights movement and how it has shaped the world that we're currently waging our class struggles in. We're going to also be discussing a clip from a veteran talking about what it is that we are getting ourselves into in the Middle East, and how scary the possibilities are. And lastly, we'll be talking about my development of a couple new concepts that I'm attempting to flesh out to think about the exploitation that's at play in data gathering and selling, which I am calling as of now absolute exploitation to describe the phenomenon, and when conjoined with the other forms of exploitation, triple exploitation. So we'll also be discussing, funny enough, Andrew Tate, the man that was once the most viral person on the internet, his discovery of wage slavery. We'll be talking about all that and much more, so stick around. You're not going to want to miss it. Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Hello, Female Rage. Hello, Ware. Hello, Norman. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a minute since I do one of these alone streams. I've been able to enjoy them quite a bit when I've done them. Hello, June. I hope to have a good time with you all, not just react to news and talk about different, things that we have prepared on the stream plan for today, but also answer questions from you all. And as always, would like to mention from the start that the Institute is a people's funded project, and we can't do a fraction of what we do without audience funding. So if you have the means and are willing to consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/MidwesternMark. So now that we have that out of the way, we can get started. Hello, Lagging Games. The first story I wanted to cover is somewhat of an interesting one. It's Andrew Tate, the man that supposedly broke out of the Matrix. Maybe he did. I don't know. We'll see this video. One of the interesting things about folks like this is that there's always some critique of the system as a whole, but then the solutions that are provided are always within the framework of that system itself. We've talked about in the past, the role of the compatible left, about the role of radical recuperators, a concept that Professor Gabriel Rockhill has developed. We've talked to him plenty of times on the show about this concept. And we tend to associate it to the objects that were tied to the critique when the concept was developed, which is primarily Western Marxism. But I think this applies to a wide variety of other areas where the bourgeoisie provides for us certain figures, certain movements that get dissenting attitudes and energies that exist in the masses and locate them there and keep them in a position that is substantially not actually anti-establishment, substantially not anti the capitalist imperialist system. Because to do that, you have to be for something. You can't just have this pure empty negativity. You know, the negative always carries with it a positive content, and more often than not, these red pill critics, the positive content that's tied to their negative is something that continues to reinforce the established order. But it's still important to engage with it, just like it is important to engage with Western Marxism and other more advanced and coherent forms of radical recuperators, as I've done in that book that you see back there, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism, as in other areas as well. So let's listen to, I guess, Comrade Kate now. It's Comrade Tate describe wage slavery, and then let's analyze it for a little bit.
You're to say to me right now, Andrew, you can have slaves. I'd say, okay. You have to house them. You have to feed them. You have to give them medical care to make sure they stay alive. And then you have to somehow get them to work hard at the best of their ability, even though they're not motivated because they're slaves. That sounds very difficult. It sounds expensive. It sounds like a lot of work. It's much easier to just pay these people a very low wage in which they can barely afford their own house, barely afford their own food. So they're still enslaved for a little bit of money, barely afford their own medical care, but they still have to do everything I say. Wage slavery has replaced traditional slavery because it's easier for the elites to keep you a wagee than it is to make you a slave. Let's make sure the money inflates. Let's make sure everyone's poor. This is why we always talk about making money to escape the matrix. Make sure everybody's broke, and then we'll just make them wagees, because a wagee is just a slave of another kind where we haven't got to worry about actually dealing with their health care, actually giving them a house. We can just give them these few pennies of money we print, and they're still stuck. If you were to say to me right now, Andrew, you can have slaves.
So that's I think that's absolutely true. You know, and it was how it was often talked about, even in the U.S. after we were able to overcome chattel slavery. A lot of the abolitionist critics of chattel slavery turned their attention to wage slavery. You look at the writings of Frederick Douglass following the abolition of slavery, and he talks about, you know, what are we getting ourselves into? Is it really substantially better than chattel slavery? And I think there's many ways in which it is substantially better than chattel slavery. I don't want to denigrate the horrendous conditions of chattel slavery, specifically in the ways that it was practiced in the Americas and the racialized forms that it took. It's a qualitative leap forward into wage slavery, but it's still a form of slavery. You're still radically disconnected from any sense of human autonomy over your work and what you do in order to survive. So critiques of capitalism as a system that produces this form of wage slavery that might come into the historical scene proclaiming all of these democratic values at the level of politics and civil society, but that at the economic level it sustains this aristocratic hierarchical structure, are very old. They're not, Tate didn't invent these, and Marxism itself didn't invent these. You know, critiques of wage slavery as a form of slavery were already found in various forms in the utopian socialists. They're also found in the earliest parts of the tradition of American socialism, which is rooted in many ways in some of the democratic ideals of the Declaration of Independence, and specifically Jefferson's thought. You had in the mid to late 20s a whole outburst of various thinkers, from Cornelius Blatchley, Langdon Billsby, William McClure, and many others that often had some form of interaction with the utopian communities that we had here in the U.S. and were left very much dissatisfied. They understood that the idea of creating an alternative world within the existing system, and of doing it out of on the material basis of a bourgeois philanthropy, and basing a form of communism or socialism on the harmonization of class antagonisms, rather than on the basis of exploiting these contradictions and these class antagonisms, so that the pregnant character of the system with contradictions that can develop into a new system can naturally unfold. They were seeing the futility of utopian socialism, and some of them began to attempt to study the capitalist system systematically, see how this exploitation and oppression and polarization of wealth, where a small group of people get immensely rich while the vast majority stay in dire poverty, how that's a structural, systematic component of the capitalist system. And they attempt to develop, already in the 1820s to 1830s, something that we would call later on, when Marxism comes around, scientific socialism. Now, they don't complete the project. The capitalism that they're analyzing, specifically in the US, is very embryonic. But nonetheless, there's that attempt to provide a scientific understanding of the system, and a scientific understanding of how it is that, on the basis of the system's own contradictions, a new, more egalitarian, actually democratic, actually freeing order, often called communism, socialism, communalism, etc., can already come about. So the understanding of capitalist work as wage slavery was already found in those traditions, those first early traditions of American socialism, again, that saw socialism as a practical and logical extension of the democratic ideals of the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, etc., etc. You also have, interestingly enough, critiques of wage slavery from more reactionary sectors of society, whether it's the slave-holding planters in the South who use, the despotic nature of wage slavery in the North to say that the slavery that they that they have in the South isn't that bad. And to do that, they were forced to attenuate and say some true things about the horrendous conditions of wage slavery in the North, while always leaving a blank eye and making the slavery that they were participating in, that they were profiting from, seem more rosy than it actually was. I think any fair assessment will find that more often than not, the condition, of course, of the chattel slave was much worse than of the wage slave, horrible though the wage slave's conditions might have been. So you have various angles through which this critique of wage slave is waged. And of course, this is just a small, short clip from Andrew Tate. If we see the larger thing, it might fit within a more progressive socialistic tradition. It might fit within the more conservative tradition. I doubt that it fits into either. I think this follows a trend that we've seen in American society for quite a while, which is an acknowledgement that 9-to-5 jobs are horrendous, that you're not actually free when you're working a wage job, that you're submitting your will in the form of the exertion of your labor power to another entity, to another human being who decides what you work on, how you work, how long you work, what's done with the product of your labor, who it's sold to, who it's not sold to, for how much it's sold for, et cetera, et cetera. But instead of saying, the solution to this is working people coming together, recognizing the historical and transient character of the system that creates these conditions, and recognizing how it is within their power as a class, especially unifying with other popular classes as well, to overthrow the system and create a qualitatively better one, where working people are in power and we actually have what the American dream promised, a government of, by, and for the people. Instead of taking it to that logical socialist conclusion, they usually provide a similar utopian exit, like don't take the 9-to-5 route, don't go to university, don't do this, don't do whatever the system asks you, just learn how to be financially literate, learn how to scheme your way into being rich so that you can have this freedom. And that's obviously not a solution. That's an escape. That's not fighting fire with water, which is how you succeed in fighting a fire. That's fighting fire with fire. That's saying, the solution to the problems that I experience in my everyday life that come from the capitalist system are going to be solved individually by myself alone, through the process of myself becoming a capitalist, of myself becoming an exploiter and an oppressor, a little different than those who participated as the agents of the system that led me to such a position of despair and such a critical position with regards to 9-to-5 jobs and and wage slavery. So I think it's overall a positive, a semi positive step. Like a lot of these radical recuperators, there's always a rational kernel there that I think must be exploited, for a lack of a better term. There's a rational kernel that we can get and disarticulate from that worldview and rearticulate towards another one. We can tell people, well, what are the actual odds that if you attempt to become rich yourself, to find this freedom that only lies outside of the 9-to-5 job, what are the actual possibilities of you accomplishing something like that? Statistics come out every now and then that sometimes it's even more likely for you to win the lottery than to do that through just sheer hard work and effort and ingenuity. So, you sustain the critique. Yes, this is a miserable system that we exist in. We don't escape it by becoming the agents of the miserable system. We escape it by coming together and fighting. And look at the example of China. Look at the example of Cuba. Look at the example of the since overthrown but hopefully returning Soviet Union, of Vietnam, of Laos, etc. These are countries that, under even worse conditions than the ones that we are in, were able to band together, fight off against the exploiters, and create a society where the people are actually in power. That's the route that is actually the red pill route. That's the route that the Matrix will never allow you to see. The Matrix allows you to see Tate. The Matrix allows you to see all these other radical recuperators, the Zizeks, etc. The Matrix doesn't want you to see Lenin. The Matrix doesn't want you to see, the Midwestern Marx Institute. It doesn't want you to see people who are actually criticizing the system and approaching things from the Marxist point of view. Remember what Engels said. The dialectical materialist method, that means Marxist philosophy, is the sharpest tool and best working weapon that the proletariat has in its struggle for a new world. So if you actually want to be red pill, this is the analysis that you need. But I think it's a hop, skip, and a jump away. I don't know if that's the correct phrase. A hop, skip, and a jump away from where Tate is at, the critique of wage slavery, to an actual Marxist position. So overall, I think it's a positive phenomenon, but we have to go there, get the people that he has convinced about wage slavery, and rearticulate their understanding, disarticulate it from a Tatean, almost like libertarian-like worldview, and towards a communist, Marxist-Leninist worldview. Okay, so that's the first segment on Tate and his critique of wage slavery. Watching Midwestern Marx at work is the best way to spend time at work. Absolutely. I think it is a mistaken cause and effect. Fascism follows after socialism. It's a losing battle to try. Yeah, not sure about that. So that's that. Let me see what we can go on to next. I'm trying to remember how it was that the style things on the Google Doc. I can't seem to remember. Wanted to show you all this clip, which is a skit that I think provides a good metaphor for the settlements that are taking root and have been taking root for a very long time in the West Bank, and how completely absurd it is. I think it's often good for examples to be given that are different from the one that actually exists, but that follow the same logic and relationality, so that when it's tied to a new example, people can realize and maybe step out of the outlook that they've been conditioned into thinking about the specific issue with, and see it anew and begin to see its flaws. This is something that in my analysis that I do on the Paradise movie, I make a point of saying the importance of these sci-fi films, and how with proper guidance you can see the homologies between the society that we live in and the society of the dystopia that the films are producing. But we'll get to that later on. For now, let's watch this skit.
Hello, nice to meet you. Do you live here?
Yes.
With your family?
No, I live alone. So, sorry, who?
Oh, that's even easier. This is my house.
What?
Sorry, my English is not very good. Is this Bath?
Yes. See?
Is Bath a Roman city?
I see. You're joking. It's a lovely joke. Because you're Italian, you think that you own this place because...
No, there is no joke. The Romans occupied England in the 5th century, so anyone of Roman descent has an historic claim to this land. Now leave, my family is waiting outside.
Oh my God, you're serious?
Yes, my god Jupiter proclaimed it. So now pack up and peace off, pretty boy.
Your English sounds pretty good to me. Listen. You can't just turn up to someone's house, evict them, and then move in because you think you're the descendants of someone who lived here thousands of years ago. You know that's ridiculous, right?
It's pretty wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hi guys, come in. Anti-Jupiterite.
So that's literally how it happens. That is literally how it happens. The settlers are fucking armed to the teeth. They show up at someone's house and they tell them, get out. It's our house now. And they make up some bullshit excuse for it. And the reality is not that they have any ownership or claim onto the land because of any biblical reference or Torah reference. The reality is that it's a settler colonial imperialist project. It's a state that's the baby of Western imperialism, first British, now led by the American state. And that it uses the state as a colonial outpost in the Middle East. And so it populates it with its own European Jewish people. And they are taking the land with no legitimate legal rights to it. They're just taking it on the basis of sheer power. Again, in most cases, it's similar to this. It's my land, no ifs, ands, or buts. And here's a weapon that you don't have, that if I use it, you're dead. And here's your argument. Here's your logos. The logos takes the form of a weapon that we use to show you that we have the power, so get out. So unfortunately, that's what has been happening in the West Bank for quite a while. We just did an interview with Dan Kovalik, a terrific individual, someone who's brilliant and who had just traveled to the West Bank. We talked with him about his travels to the West Bank and the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people, specifically focused on Gaza, in the recent upload that we did of the last or second to last Educate Against Genocide class that we've been hosting to talk about Zionism, the history of the Palestinian plight, imperialism, etc. So that's that. Let me see these comments. This is a sadly hilarious example of the nonsensical Zionist claim of Palestine. It absolutely is, and it's important to provide these examples so that people can abstract from the way that they're viewing the narrative on the basis of the worldviews that have been sort of imbued into them by the society that they live in. And once you disconnect it from this, code words and events and states and parts of the world that they have been taught to think about in various different ideological ways, it becomes easier for them to see how absurd, how deeply irrational some of these claims are. Another good example of that is, for all the people that perhaps condemn Hamas and Hamas's action, ask them, like, if you were in the same position, how would you act? Would you just sit back and let your land be taken, your people be bombed, your kids be killed, whole family lines wiped out? Would you just take it? Would you leave your homes so that the colonial power just takes it? I think the vast majority of Americans that you phrase it in that form too will realize that something like October 7th is not beyond the reach of them doing themselves if they were in a similar position. Okay. They say they can't see me. Let me know if you could see me or not before I continue to the next segment. So, someone let me know in the chat if you can see me before I go on. I would imagine you can. but okay. So the next one is something that was sent to me by Julie through Instagram. By the way, if any of you want to suggest things to react to, please do message them. You could do it through the the Discord, and there's various other means. You can send it to our email if you want. That's midwesternmarks@gmail.com. Love the new setup. It's I guess it's halfway a new setup. I'm not in Carbondale. I'm staying at my parents' house for the holidays. I'll be back in a couple of days, but so I still have my old setup, but this is my temporary setup for the streams. So let's watch this video. This is a veteran speaking about what it is that exactly we're getting ourselves into, and what are the implications and how bad it could actually be. Let me see if I can make this somehow bigger. It's bigger, but I'm not sure if it's better. I'm dissatisfied with each one of these. Let's see. No, that's not very good. I'll just stick to this one. Okay, so let's give this a watch.
This message is for Joe Biden and the American people. I served 22 years in the Marine Corps. I'm retired now. But while I was a foreign area officer for the Middle East and North Africa. I was paid for my opinions. I'm going to give Joe Biden some advice because the people he is surrounding himself with seem to be only interested in looking out for Israeli interest rather than American interest. So here's some advice. Today, Israel assassinated a Hamas leader.
I want to say there's a conservative angle to this, which is to make fun of the people that are supporting Israel as, they're Israel first and not America first. There's a rational kernel to that. Remember that in every case of convincing someone, of waging the war of positions, the war for obtaining the consent of our people, you have to tie it to something that they already agree with. And bringing up the question of how does this benefit the American people is always an important one, because there is no benefit that we obtain from waging these wars against people whom we have more in common with than the people who often send our brothers and sisters, our friends, to war so that they come back dismembered, with scars of the soul, PTSD, or often in a casket. So it's important to ask, how does this benefit the American people exactly? Who is benefiting from this? Cui bono? Who benefits? Because it's on the basis of that question that we come to realize really it's only the elite. It's a military-industrial complex. It's massive oil companies, and it's the politicians whose pockets they are in, so that instead of representing the American people, they represent the interests of the class that hires them to run their class's state, which is the big monopoly capitalist class. So there's a rational kernel in those phrases. They're not America first, they're America last, they're Israel first or something.
They're in Beirut, Lebanon. Now, they're at war with Hamas, and everybody understands that, but this assassination was in a different country. And they did that, Israel did that, to pull the United States into war. Israel cannot win the war against Hamas. It wants to drag Hezbollah into a wider regional conflict. And it knows that the only way it might have a chance is to bring American troops in. And I'm telling you, you don't want to do that. They pulled us into an unnecessary war in Iraq where friends...
This is true. Israel's already they're losing to Hamas. The only thing they're good at is killing innocent children, women, and the elderly. But when it comes to actually fighting Hamas, they've lost. They're not winning. So just imagine if you throw Hezbollah on there. Just imagine if you throw the Houthis, and God forbid, imagine if you throw the Iranians on there. It's a done deal for Israel, and I would say that even with the might of the American military, it's still very hard to conceive of a victory, whatever that word implies in this case, in that region of the world. And connected to that is another more basic fact that we know is true from the history of the Vietnamese, the history of the Cubans, the Chinese, of the Palestinians currently, which is that it doesn't matter how much technological devices the empire has, it is always no match. It is never a match for a people that are determined to be free. If a people are determined to be free, they'll beat you with sticks and stones, even if you have all the rocket and firepower in the world, the most advanced firepower in the world. So it's extremely unlikely that in a conflict of such magnitude, the imperialists can come out winning, when in the conflicts against Hamas itself, or the conflicts in their proxy war against Russia, they do not win. They have not won.
And brothers died, and they're looking to do the same thing now. Now, why did they assassinate this guy in Beirut? He wasn't that senior. I mean, Ismail Haniyeh is in Qatar. They know exactly where he is. He's the most senior leader in Hamas. They could have assassinated him, but they know Qatar is not going to war with them over an assassination. They also have, Hamas also has leaders in Egypt, but they also know that Egypt is not going to war with them. They assassinated this senior level official in Hamas, in Beirut, so that they can elicit a response from Hezbollah, which will turn the current attacks on Gaza into a wider regional conflict, which will draw the United States into this war.
This is something that we've been saying from the start, perhaps echoing Michael Hudson a little bit, who's been seeing this horrific genocidal war against the people of Gaza as the opening of a third front against what can be rightly called, I think, the global triad of evil, the troika of evil, to use, I believe it was Mike Pompeo's term for Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela. So the global troika of evil, triad of evil, is very clearly Iran, China, and Russia. And, they've been waging for the last 2 years the proxy, well, not really the last 8-9 years now, the proxy war against Russia. You can even take that back even further. They've been waging or attempting to set the ground for waging the proxy war against China, specifically with the issue of Taiwan and the process of reunification. And the war against Iran, they've attempted various ways to get that going. They murdered Qasem Soleimani, one of the most beloved figures in the whole region, someone who was the slayer of ISIS and of terrorists, loved by people who, often saw themselves in opposing sides of the political spectrum in the region. And they murdered him. And for a period of time, I remember covering that issue here at the Institute, and it was very scary. We felt like we were on the precipice of a third world war with nuclear implications, because it was almost certain that if it escalated, that Russia would obviously join on Iran's side. So it's been an ongoing process of the U.S. trying to destabilize some of the key figures that are behind the creation of this new world, which is heterogeneous in character. The BRICS and the new world, multipolar, post-hegemonic, whatever you want to call it, world that it's bringing into being. I've often described it specifically in the book, The Purity Fetish, as a post-1492, post-Columbian world, because the centers of global power are going back to the East, whereas they have been basically in the West since 1492 and the beginning of capitalist colonialism. But you have this new world that's coming about, and these three nations, Russia, these three civilizations, frankly, Russia, China, and Iran, are really the nucleus of this new shift in global power eastward. And the U.S. is trying any which way possible to destabilize them. And the coalition that they have built is not an ideological one. It's not something like the Comintern or like the ComCon, the series of markets that the socialist camp had to engage with each other. It's something heterogeneous. It's not ideological. It has anything from developmentalist national bourgeois states, some of them on the border of fascism, sort of Hindustan fascism like you have in India. And then you have socialist states like China. So it's not a socialist world that they're bringing into existence, but it is almost like a post-hegemonic world, a post-American imperialism world that they're bringing into existence that will have its own set of contradictions. It's not going to bring global socialism. People who often are critical about those who see this rise of BRICS as hopeful, painted as if we are these delusional idiots who think that the rise of BRICS is magically going to bring about global socialism. That's not at all how it is that we are thinking, at least not in the Institute. We see it as a progressive step forward, but one that's also going to be tied with a new set of contradictions that I think either way is going to put the working class in a better position for grabbing power in the countries where it has yet to grab power, and furthering the movement of history towards that track down to socialism that it's been on ever since it started. But let's keep this going.
And I am telling you, as an American, as a retired military officer, as someone who used to give advice to senior military commanders, which political leaders rarely ever followed, to not get dragged in. You need to tell your spoiled little child called Israel, which receives more money than any state in this country based on the amount of taxes we generate and the amount of money we get back from the federal government. You need to tell your little spoiled child who cannot follow any rules or laws, who spies on us, who has killed Americans, who does whatever it wants, regardless of what you want, to stop this war and stop the stupidity. At a minimum, you need to force Netanyahu to leave government so that someone more reasonable can take over.
What's interesting is that it's getting to a point where it becomes extremely clear that the actions of the frankly globalized capitalist, big monopoly capitalist class is in no way, shape, or form capable to legitimize itself to its own nations as acting in their interest. Whether this is Europe, where it's becoming extremely apparent that the ruling class is just beholden to an American rooted global, specifically financial, but other forms of capital bourgeoisie, big monopoly bourgeoisie, or whether it's the U.S. It's becoming extremely clear that even in terms of the interests of a sort of petty, smaller or big, but not massive bourgeoisie, national bourgeoisie, they're still not acting in their interest. It is in no one's but the globally organized big monopoly capitalist class's interest to wage these wars. It is in no one else's interest. It is in the interest of even a small component of the capitalist class. So it becomes more apparent to people who, they might not be socialists, they might not even be thinking in terms of the American people's interest as the interest of the working class. They might just think of it in terms of, they look around and they see American society and, they're still thinking about it in sort of older capitalist terms. Even those people are seeing how the stage of capitalism that we're in, even if they don't understand it in that form, the stage of capitalism that we're in that is so globalized is something that is irreconcilable with the interests of specific nations. The only interest that is consistently upheld is that of the big globalized bourgeoisie, monopoly bourgeoisie. And I think that, if this is true, which I think it is, the response has to be an anti-monopoly coalition, which is what the Communist Party proposed under the leadership of Henry Winston at one point. We need an anti-monopoly coalition. If you're against this big monopoly, financialized capitalist class that controls basically the global economy of every country that's within the sphere of empire, if you're against them, you're going to be with us. Now, there's going to be 1,000,001 contradictions amongst the people, again, to resuscitate Mao's terms. But the principal contradiction is going to be the struggle against that class which is found both in the Republican and Democratic Party, in terms of the political parties that exert their interest.
Joe Biden, you will not get elected again if you don't start taking some actions. You are being called Genocide Joe. not by just Republicans, but Democrats as well, because you've surrounded yourself with Zionists working for the interests of a foreign nation. This message is for Joe Biden and the American people.
All right, so there you have it. He's absolutely right. None of this is in the interest of the American people. There's no globally organized capitalist class unless you're revising Negri Empire's or Kautsky's Ultra. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's not correct at all. It's 100%. I mean, we have fucking the International Monetary Fund. We have the World Bank. We have a whole host of globalized institutions of finance capital. This isn't fucking 1918. Imperialism has reached a new stage. Someone asked here, what stage of capital? I think we're in the stage of neo-imperialism, a higher stage of imperialism where, you know, the extraction of surplus value is as parasitical as it's ever been. It's never been more parasitical than it is now. We're in a stage of neo-imperialism, which is how Cheng and Fu describes it in China's Economic Dialectic, a book that was recently translated and published by international publishers. So it's and yes, because of the globalized character, a lot of the countries that are participating in the creation of this new world, the BRICS camp, if you want to call it that, are forced to participate in these global financialized institutions. And part of the struggle is this, you know, seeing how it is that on the basis of where they're at, they can break out of them and create their own alternative institutions, things like the Shanghai Cooperation Corporation, things like the New Development Bank of the BRICS, which are still relatively small with respects to the global financial institutions, but which keep growing on a day-to-day basis as the world turns away from US-led imperialism towards this alternative world order. So let's get that down. Let's see, not many comments, not many questions here. That's fine. Let's go on to our next segment. Let's see, we covered these. This is a clip from South Park, which I think makes some interesting points about bourgeois ideology and the gaps that exist between the enunciated ideals of the ruling class and the reality that their system promotes. So let's give this a watch.
We cannot found a country based on war. We cannot found a country that is afraid to fight. Rabble! 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 Mr. Franklin, where do you stand on the war issue?
I believe that if we are to form a new country, we cannot be a country that appears war-hungry and violent to the rest of the world. However, we also cannot be a country that appears weak and unwilling to fight to the rest of the world. So, what if we form a country that appears to want both?
If the people of our new country are allowed to do whatever they wish, then some will support the war and some will protest it.
And that means that as a nation, we could go to war with whomever we wished, but at the same time act like we didn't want to. If we allow the people to protest what the government does, then the country will be forever blameless.
It's like having your cake and eating it too. Think of it. An entire nation founded on saying one thing and doing another.
Wow, I get it now. I get it.
We cannot.
So that's if you know the history of the ideals that are propped up by the ruling classes in the bourgeois revolutions of the 18th and 19th century, you understand that there's this deep gap between the reality of the social orders that they bring into being and the ideals of freedom, fraternity, equality, democracy, liberty that they enunciate in the process of waging their revolutions against feudal absolutism and the various aristocracies that they were struggling against. And this distinction or this gap between the enunciated ideals and the reality of the order is rooted in one, the fact that in order for these revolutions to succeed, they needed mass support. If they only had the support of the merchant class, the capitalists, there's no waging a revolution. You can't have a revolution just from the capitalist class. The capitalist class needs to present itself as a historically universal class, as a class on the basis of whose emancipation everyone else gets emancipated. And the reality is that That's how they were able to win the support of the masses, of those who felt themselves in contradiction with the feudal order and the various forms of absolutism that existed. And once we see the system concretize, once we see that new mode of life take more and more mature form, a form of an actual social totality, and not just the embryo that we see in the late 18th century, we begin to notice how none of the ideals that are proclaimed in the bourgeois revolutions are ever actually realized for the vast majority of people. That for the vast majority of people, the feudal absolutisms simply took another form. They're still being exploited, they're still being oppressed. Sometimes they're working even more. I mean, economic anthropology shows us that there were some feudal societies where the peasants were working on average anywhere from 3 to 5 hours a day for 6 days a week. If you compare that to the earliest proletarians of the modern capitalist era, they're working 12, 14 hours, often commuting an hour to and from work. So, the workload sometimes multiplied itself by 2 or 3 or even 4 times. So it became very clear that yes, the ideals are very lofty and neat, but they're abstract and they're empty and they're unrealizable within the existing capitalist framework. And in order to realize those lofty bourgeois ideals, you need a radically new system. And it needs to be based on the struggle of an actually universal class, a class on the basis of whose emancipation actually can emancipate everyone else. And the earliest writings from Marx discovering that this class is the proletariat, he says it's because it's the class that bears all of the brunts of society, such that if it removes all of these brunts, it will be at the same time removing whatever brunt any other class has, because it bears all of them. It bears the vast majority of them. Then later on, he's going to analyze it in a much more refined way by seeing how it is that it is this class that produces the vast majority of surplus for the society that becomes essential. It is the class that produces produces literally all of society, or at least the more essential things for capitalist economies. And it's on the basis of it being the most exploited class that it has this revolutionary potential, not only of it being the most oppressed, the most exploited, and the most oppressed sometimes overlaps, sometimes not. So the proletariat, the working class, found itself in the Marxist analysis being that universal emancipatory class that's able to get those bourgeois lofty ideals of freedom, democracy, liberty, fraternity, equality, etc., and give them a particular form, concretize them by producing an order where it's not the freedom of capital, it's not bourgeois democracy, that's democracy in form and not in substance. That's not a formal equality in civil society that maintains horrendous inequalities at the level of the economic base, at the level of politics, at the level of the judicature of a society, but that actually realizes this by creating an order where everyone is a worker, where everyone works, and that the people, the vast majority of society, is actually the one that's in control of the state apparatus, of production, of the civil institutions, and creates a society that serves society itself, not a small class of people whose sole goal, and being the personified agents of that system, is to accumulate as much capital as possible. So I recently did an article on Santa Claus, where I make let me see if I can pull it up, where I mention how it is that this gap between the enunciated ideals of the bourgeoisie and the reality of the social order that they produce is evident in the case of Santa Claus. Santa Claus is, basically a communist. I jump off a clip from Foil, Arms, and Hog called "Santa is Captured by the Russians," where he's interviewed by the KGB, and they're like trying to figure this guy out. Why is he traveling to all these houses, violating our no-fly zones and doing all of these things, sneaking into people's? What are all these lists that he has? And Santa Claus says at the end, I literally just give out toys to the children in the world, all the children. The police ask, well, for what? Santa says, well, for nothing. The police says, are you a communist? He says, why do you think I'm wearing red, comrade? And then the police says, comrades, bring us 2 vodkas and 1 cookies and milk. So, Santa Claus, the figure of Santa Claus, the stories of Saint Nick, they're, deeply rooted in a more sort of Christian socialism and upholding of the interests of the poor and in a sort of ethic of giving without having to obtain from that giving either tax breaks or the sort of philanthropic profile that helps in more perverse ways the accumulation process for a capitalist. He just gives. He leaves the toys and he dips out. And specifically, it's always emphasized that he leaves toys for the poor. He wants poor kids to have the opportunity to live their childhood and enjoy as wealthy kids could with their toys. And it's deeply rooted in a struggle against poverty that takes the specific form of Santa Claus giving you a gift. But in terms of values, it completely defies the logic of capitalism, where giving is always rooted in the same bottom line that guides everything else. And how can I make money off of this? Santa Claus is not thinking, how can I make money off of giving these gifts? He's just giving for the sake of social good, making an impact in the world, a positive one. However, the reality is that this same Santa Claus, whose stories we accept and we love and that make us feel very warm inside, ends up functioning as a sort of veil, for a deeply exploitative and consumerist society. And the reality is that it's consume, and that's given the mask of this socialistic Santa Claus narrative. So again, there's a clear gap between the enunciated values, the enunciated narratives of the bourgeoisie, of the ruling class, that they force society to accept, and the reality of the order that they bring about. So I'm going to read this paragraph. While this is the dominant narrative we operate with, the reality of our commodified Christmas and of Santa Claus as the personified agent of such commodification is directly opposed to the narrative itself. As Valerie Pan notes, modern capitalist Christmas has turned Santa Claus into a decorative marketing tool for hysterical shopping. Santa's commodified image, first used by Coca-Cola in the 1930s, has become instrumental in helping the capitalists realize profits. He has become an instrument used to, as Marx notes in volumes 2 and 3 of Capital, cut the turnover time of capital. The shorter the period of turnover, the smaller this idle portion of capital as compared with the whole, and the larger, therefore, the appropriated surplus, provided other conditions remain the same. So what you have here is false consciousness. It's false consciousness. It's an ideological turning of the world on its head. And it's absolutely necessary for capitalism. The cell form, the germ of capitalism, the commodity, is rooted itself in this form of inversion of the world, in this form of false consciousness. That's part of the essence of the commodity fetishism, a turning of the things on their head. And we see it here with the Santa Claus narrative. Once again, capitalism needs its sort of narrative of the socialistic, in terms of values, Santa Claus, in order to preserve the exploitative consumerist practices that are the reality. And it needs the world to understand itself in this upside down way. And so when we encounter people that believe that Christmas is about these values, that error that they have is not subjective. It is not a problem of epistemic hygiene, and it's not a problem of how it is that they view the world. It's a problem of the objective constitution of the world itself. The world is one which needs people to understand that same world itself in a way that's always incorrect, in a way that's always erroneous, that always turns the reality of the actual state of affairs on its head. It is a world that, instead of reflecting itself correctly as a mirror would, it refracts itself and presents a distorted image of what reality actually is. And there's no clearer example of this than the narratives that we have about Christmas and the reality of capitalist consumerist Christmas. So as we were talking previously about the South Park clip of the American ideals and then the reality, that's just central to bourgeois ideology in general. This constant inversion of reality in order to legitimize itself ideologically and obtain the consent of masses of people whose interests, class interests, are not in line with the order that they are upholding and reproducing. Okay. We have a right to reappropriate symbols for our use. Yes, we absolutely do. We should. We must. Santa economic central planning. Yes. Stalinist Santa. I love it. A big fan of Santa. I am too. I like Santa. He's a cool cat. He basically looks like what a communist uniform should look like for like winter schools or something. If we're not dressing like Santa in the Midwest after socialism arrives, we did something wrong. That should be the children's uniform when they go to school. You see, this is the reality part of it. The narrative is the opposite. He goes to poorhouses and he leaves. Like the actual story of Saint Nick is that he literally just goes into the houses of the poor, leaves the gifts, and dips out and doesn't want any recognition at all. The initial stories of Saint Nick have nothing to do with giving to rich kids. It gives specifically to poor kids, and on the basis of those miracles that were performed, Saint Nick becomes a saint. Let's see. Giving for profit is called selling, I believe. Yes, absolutely. Okay. All right, let's see what else we can discuss. Let's go into the topic of Sean Fain and the UAW's discussion of Martin Luther King Jr., who we celebrate on the 15th, so in 5 days. I'm going to read this short thread from the UAW, which comes from a Sean Fain article. It says, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the greatest labor leaders in our country's history. Right off the bat, this is extremely important because people tend to think of MLK and the Black Freedom Movement that he headed and that gave us the Civil Rights Revolution of 1964, forever changing the Constitution and the social consciousness of the American people. People tend to think about those things in a very race-reductive fashion. And that's not to say that, the struggle against racism isn't a determinate form of class struggles, but it was, very clearly a class struggle when you see the rootedness it had in the working class movement, how it changed a sort of outright fascism that existed specifically in the U.S. South, and how it improved the lives of working people, how deeply it was rooted in major unions which backed it, and labor struggles which they participated in, and specifically in the U.S. South, which was the part of the country that was most hostile to labor. So it's a working class movement through and through. Don't let anyone fool you. Yes, it has some bourgeois elements, but those were secondary. The heart and soul of the civil rights movement was working class through and through, and it was led, as was the Second American Revolution in 1865, by the Black proletariat, the section of the proletariat that has historically been the most progressive for the reasons we enunciated earlier from Marx. It's been the section of the proletariat that has bared the most brunts from society and that has had to keep its chin up and fight back with dignity for democracy and freedom and these values that are never realized for working people. Now I think because of 1964, we're at a different situation, and a lot of the brunts have become universalized. You look at the drug epidemics and the zombie neighborhoods. Now they're not just in black neighborhoods, they're in white neighborhoods as well. You look at the problem of debt. It's basically universal in the working class. You look at the inability of people to pay the basic necessities that they need at the end of the month. Again, it's basically universal in the working class. So in many ways, the white proletariat, in terms of material conditions, is as similar as it's been with the black proletariat as ever. and that creates, along with this transformation of social consciousness brought forth by the Civil Rights Revolution, the most fertile conditions for a united class struggle, because the public and psychological wages that Du Bois talked about as the material foundation that allows for racist false consciousness, they've been completely, or not completely, but largely removed. And if you're interested in that, I'll link a paper that I did for the Journal of Labor and Society, peer-reviewed academic article, where I described that in the process of talking about the importance of W.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction as the foundational text for American Marxism. But we'll keep this going. He was not president of any union, but the struggle for economic justice on and off the job was a core, undeniable part of historian vision. I see King, again, this is Sean Fain, the leader of the UAW, as a direct inspiration and guiding light of the 21st century union movement. That's huge, it's so easy for many on the left, specifically the ultra left, to just downgrade King. If you're not seeing the immensity of King in American history and for today, the relevance of King's thought for today, his ability to connect, the international situation to the national situation, the Black freedom movement to the general struggle of the working class, his ability to root it in a way that's centered in the traditions of the United States and the various struggles and progressive fights and thought that has been created over the course of our history of the process of the American people becoming a people. If you can't see that, you're going to have a very hard time succeeding in a revolutionary struggle and winning your people over in the U.S. But as we gather next week to commemorate his life, mission, and legacy, I'm struck by how intertwined his movement and the labor movement remain decades later. That's beautifully said. I see the echoes of King everywhere I go, not just in the UAW Solidarity House where he penned an early draft of his I Have a Dream speech, but across the country, and particularly in the South, where he called home. My mind is on the South a lot these days, as thousands of non-union auto workers concentrated in South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky have just launched their own movement for economic justice. These workers are taking action, signing union cards and launching public campaigns to win the economic justice they've just seen auto workers win in the Detroit 3. In other ways, I'd like to think King would find this movement deeply familiar. He was no stranger to the fight for workers' rights. In fact, it was him who said, all labor has dignity. I think it was also Abraham Lincoln, by the way. And he was no stranger to the strike, as his final campaign was the Memphis sanitation worker strike. That's, what got him killed. It is the process of learning from one another and marching side by side that marks the meaning of Martin Luther King Jr. Day for our union and our movement. I don't think it's a coincidence that our 21st century movement for Southern workers' rights has found its first home in Tennessee, the same state where King's fight left off. It is also not a coincidence that our new auto industry has migrated to Alabama, where thousands of workers are standing up at Mercedes, Hyundai, Toyota, Honda, and Mazda. By the way, this is an extremely important point because it sees, that which Benjamin called the angel of history. The way in which people's struggles are, here's where I disagree with Benjamin. They are, yes, of course, looking at the future, but they're also looking at the past. They're looking at those who waged struggles and fought and died, as in the case of King, lost job opportunities, were tortured, a million things happened to them. A million sacrifices were made in order to push the struggle forward. And we can't let those die in vain. How can we live with ourselves if we don't advance the class struggle, if we don't redeem those that came before us? We're redeeming the struggles of oppressed and exploited people in this movement. And when the UAW raises the struggles that it's doing in these various parts of the country as a continuation of Dr. King's legacy, it's doing precisely that act of redeeming and carrying forth the struggle. In many ways, it is allowing King to constantly resurrect King, and with King, the civil rights movement and the Black freedom movement that, really that he was the head of for a period of time, and now the soul of. The state was, in some ways, King's most iconic battlefield, from the Montgomery bus boycott to Selma's Bloody Sunday. It is the same domain of anti-worker politicians and those who would stoke racial division that America's 21st century auto workers must struggle on to achieve their fair share of economic justice. So again, very clear understanding here of the class struggle and how racism is a tool of the capitalist class to divide working people. As we are approaching a century since King's birth and 90 years since the UAW's birth, it is no coincidence that our struggles remain intertwined. This is historic, man. One of the flaws that the labor movement has had has been that it's often been divided from the general struggle of the Black freedom movement, which has been, as we often say here, following Du Bois and Winston, the nucleus of the class struggle, the determinate form that the class struggle has taken here in the U.S., led by the Black proletariat. But now we have a UAW that is seeing itself as being in the legacy of King and the Black freedom movement, and that when it speaks about international issues, it connects it deeply to the struggle of working people here at home, as it's done in its more than a month long now call for a ceasefire. And as far as I know, I haven't seen them endorse the Democrats yet, which is sort of the archetype of the labor movement way to go in politics. Just tail the Democrats, who claim that they'll give them some crumbs. So it's, again, the more I see Sean Fain, the more excited I get. And if there was a New Year's wish that I can hope to have realized, is that there's some effort at turning this currently economic struggle into a political one. I'd love to see a labor party, a people's party, grow out of these movements. And they're going to have to realize that with what we have at the level of politics right now, these two bourgeois parties, we're going to get nothing done. We need a people's party, and it has to be situated in the labor movement. It has to be situated in the struggle of the Black freedom movement, and in these progressive struggles that can only realize the things that they're aiming for in a radically new society. So, something like a Sean Fain, Chris Small's ticket for maybe not 2024, it's too soon, but for 2028 would be pretty darn cool. But again, local politics is also essential. So getting a labor party up and running for various positions around the country would be pretty badass. In connection to that, I also wanted to pull up a quote from MOK that they shared. They're also calling, as Nico mentions here, for a general strike by, I believe, 2027, 2028, to have all of the unions align the ending of their contract in May 1st so that they can do a general strike that lines up with Labor Day. Not Labor Day, International Workers' Day. Here's a quote from MOK that the UAW shared. The labor movement was the principal force that transformed misery and despair into hope and progress. That is, again, so essential. So many people say, well, capitalism has given us this, capitalism has given us that. Capitalists haven't given us shit. Everything, the small bits of fucking enjoyment that we have, it's been won by working people's struggles, often led by communists and socialists, as MOK was. So beautiful, beautiful quote. And this other one I wanted to pull up as well here is from a speech that MOK gave, quoted by the New York Times many, many years ago. The security we profess to seek and foreign adventures we will lose in our decaying cities. The bombs in Vietnam explode at home. They destroy the dream and possibility of a decent America. That couldn't be more important to blast, to proliferate in today's world. A world in which the republic is falling apart, and it's getting sucked dry by the empire, as Parenti would say. We have no money to clean up our streets, to raise the living standards of our people, to have wages that allow us to not be concerned with whether we'll be able to pay for the bills at the end of the month. We have no money for removing the crippling debt that people have for wanting to get an education, for wanting to have a house, for wanting to have an automobile that they're able to get to work in safely. We have no money for rebuilding our infrastructure. We have no money for, guaranteeing a nationalized health service for our people so that 45,000 don't die a year from the lack of insurance. We have no money for anything that has to do with the American people. But we have all the money in the world so that the small monopoly capitalist class that governs our state, that makes our state be a committee for its interest, for its class interest. We always have money so that the affairs that class wants to excite around the world, the wars that it wants to produce and carry forth, threatening millions of lives of our brothers and sisters abroad, but also of our brothers and sisters at home. We always have money for that. There's always money for war. There's always money for drone strikes. There's always money to give billions and billions to neo-Nazis in Ukraine, to give billions and billions to Nazis in Israel. We always have money for that. There's always money for war. And the reality is, as is very eloquently and poetically said here by King, those bombs that we drop abroad, they drop at home. Our cities are crumbling. And it is not a disconnected set of facts. What we're doing abroad is deeply connected to the misery that our people are suffering at home. And the only way to end both the extreme evil that we produce around the world and the misery that our people have at home is with people's movements rising up and taking power away from this parasitic big monopoly capitalist class and putting power in the hands of working people so that the state, the economy, civil society, and all the institutions in it, education, media, etc., so that it all works for the sake of human beings and not for the sake of the capital accumulation of a small parasitic class. Okay. So unbelievable the capitalist class is getting away with this shit. Yeah. It's their juridical institutions, their media, they control it all at the moment. So, but it's like a pressure cooker. At some point, it's going to have to pop. So, a question, Carlos, do you like One Piece? I know the show. I had to look it up when you asked. I know my sister has posters of the main guy, the guy that wears the shorts and the hat, but I do not watch it. I've never watched anime before, so I was my brain has never been very imaginative in that sense. I get too tired of like fictional stuff when I watch it. I've been trying to overcome it because I know it's important, but yeah, I don't think I've been able to fully do that yet. At least not with in the case of anime. So I have a couple more things I want to get to, and then we can wrap this bad boy up. So I recently watched and provided a review for this German movie from last year. I did this in my Substack. Make sure to subscribe to my Substack. You can subscribe for free and get notified every time I drop an article. A good number of them are public. And if you want to help your financially struggling boy out, you can also sign up for the price of a cappuccino to get access to all of the articles. I think it's like $5 a month. You can subscribe for the year for like $30. And if you're really loaded and want to help me, ensure that I have food for my baby and my wife and the capacity to survive and pay the bills, there's this option called Founding Member that Substack creates so that people can donate, I think, $240 for the year. But anyways, I did a review of Paradise, this dystopian anti-capitalist gem that was made out of Germany. It's basically this guy. He's the protagonist. His name is Max. he works for a company called Aeon, and what Aeon does is that it sucks life years out of usually poor people. It pays them, and then it gives those years to rich people. So that's the basic premise. It has a technology where they stick a little thing into your arm, and they connect you to the rich person that will get the years, and they can take 15 years away, and within a couple days you look 15 years older. Your body has deteriorated by 15 years, and the person that you gave the 15 years to, they look 15 years younger. So I'm not going to give any major spoilers of the movie here, and I don't do that in the article. I try to stay within the confines of the essential ideological messages and social critiques that it provides of capitalism, and drawing the homologies between the sci-fi society of paradise and the one that we live in now. But there's quite a few of this. First of all, Aeon refers, if you look it up etymologically, to the Greek. It means lifespan of around 100 years, and then it comes to mean something akin to like a vital force, or just life being. So the company Aeon is telling, because that's literally what they're taking away from working people to give to rich people. They're taking away their life. It's something that's perfectly legal, as Max's working class father-in-law notes a couple times in the movie. Interestingly enough, the movie mentions that socialist China is the leading international force behind trying to ban this life year transfer. One of the things that the company does is pitch this as an opportunity, as the bourgeoisie does with basically everything. So they describe it as winning the lottery, a winning of the lottery. And the advertisement that they put out, it says phrases like, choose your dreams. When you give time, life recompenses you. Your time, your opportunity, your choice. They tell us, the president tells us as she's speaking in a panel, when Max gets given Employee of the Year, Aeonian of the Year, after taking 276 years away from poor people to give it to the rich. The company owner, President Sophie, she says that, how great would it be if we could have the capacity to have the greatest poets of humanity, composers, scientists live decades longer. Now with these services, they'd be able to do that. And here's where I start my sort of critique, or my drawing out of, what's implicit in the movie. And, we have to remember this famous quote from Stephen Jay Gould. I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops. And it's the same thing with the Paradise Universe. How many poor people never had the condition to really actualize the potential that they had as intellectuals and serve humanity, perhaps in ways that are more beneficial than the rich scientists and the rich artists, but who are then forced to give their life years to these wealthy artists, donors, usually just big capitalists who have the ability to buy that. And as the father-in-law of Max, the protagonist, says, a working class person can work their whole damn life and they'll never be able to make enough money in order to have one of those procedures for themselves. And this is not disconnected from the fact that, as the working class father says, the rich in that society are living longer while the poor are dying sooner. Now, the thing that really scares us when we see these sorts of movies is that we recognize the societies we live in them, and we understand that if our society had the technology that this movie is centered around, it would literally act and legitimize its practices in the exact same way. But we don't even have to get there. We can just see the homologies, the structural similarities between the Paradise Universe and the societies that we live in already. Let me give you some examples. It has been scientifically established that the wealthier live longer than the poor. In study after study, they've shown how it is that twins, so, as similar as you can possibly get between two people, the twin that has the most money lives significantly longer than the one that has less money. This is evident because when you have money, you have access to better food, You can pay for subscriptions to better gyms so that you're more motivated to work out and keep up a healthy lifestyle. You have the capacity to have better medical treatment. And when you have a mixture of all of that, there's not only the direct benefits that those things bring, but there's also the absence of stress and trauma that comes when you don't have any of those things secured. And we've talked about it here a few times. The book, The Myth of Normal, from Daniel and Gabor Mate, that describes how it is that things like stress lead to diseases like cancer and other horrendous diseases that we have often just thought of as just, a luck of the draw disease. No, it's rooted in practices that are situated in the economic system that we have in the society that it produces. But if we look at this MIT study, it says that in the US, the richest 1% of men live for basically 15 years longer than the average poorest 1% of men, while amongst women, the difference is of 10 years. So what does this mean? That the ultra rich live on average 15 years longer than the poorest people in America. And when it comes to women, it's 10 years. So, what is this if not a clear example of the life of the poor being sucked out of them by the capitalist elite, so that not only they accumulate as much capital as fucking humanly and physically possible, but so that in the process, they're able to live longer. They're able to have the material means to, live longer than 10, 15 years longer than the poorest of the poor, who produce the surplus that allows the rich to live longer. So yes, we don't have that little fucking paradise technology, but it's still, in terms of the outcome, it's extremely similar. We do live in a system where capital functions, as Marx mentioned, in a vampire-like way, sucking the life out of working people, and the people that suck that life out suck life into themselves. It's the capitalist vampires that suck life into themselves. So, this inequality of life expectancy that is treated as such a crisis by these institutions of human rights or poverty studies, it's merely a reflection of the relations of production and the exploitation at the root of capital accumulation. It's a reflection of something else, of something deeper that is the essence of the capitalist system. And each of these facts are dialectically interconnected. It is not the case that the rich get richer and it's disconnected from the poor getting poor. The rich get richer and live longer because the poor are poorer and live less. They're destroying their bodies so that the rich can accumulate as much capital as possible. So there's other ways in which we waste our time. Studies have shown that in order to produce what we produce now, which in many ways is a surplus, it's just, so much gets wasted instead of, actually being distributed to people accurately. And that inequality of distribution is rooted in that the structures, the relations of production. But there's studies that show that we really only have to work around 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week. This is the prediction that John Maynard Keynes had made at the beginning of the 20th century, and that Marx's son-in-law, Paul Lafargue, had made decades before that. It has now become materially possible. The only reason why you have to slavishly work in an alienating job for 9 to 10 to 11 hours sometimes a day for 5, 6, 7 days a week is not because we don't have enough for you to be in leisure the vast majority of your time and only work 3 hours. It's because of the social relations. It's because of the capitalist system and the structure and the class relations that are operative in producing the things for society. It could be another way if we restructured those relations and had, a system whose purpose is not to accumulate capital in the hands of a small few, but to meet the needs of human beings and create such abundance that we can work literally as little as possible. Create this sort of abundance that allows for, as Martin Hoagland calls it, as much socially available free time as possible. Reduce the socially necessary labor time as much as possible. So on average, working people are working 90,000 hours throughout their life. This ends up being somewhere around like 15 years of our lives dedicated to work. And that doesn't account for how work affects us when we leave our job, how it drains us of energy so that we get home and all we want to do is just sit down, watch some football, and eat some cheese balls or something and drink a beer. You know, those are effects of the soul that you see after you clock out of work, but that are still the effects of that, you know, tiring, alienating, repetitive, mechanical work that you're forced to do literally in order to fucking survive. So what is this if not us dedicating our life to making the rich not only richer, but making them have the material means to live longer than us while we destroy our own lives doing the work that accumulates capital for them. So again, these sci-fi movies, they're scary and dystopian, but you know, one of the central pieces of dystopia is the imaginary component of it. We don't have to do a lot of imagining. It's already so rooted in the realities of the system that we have, the society of moribund capitalist imperialism in the 2020s. It's right in front of us, you know. We know that if they ever developed the technology that Paradise is centered around, they would use it in the exact same fucking ways. So, you know, another telling side of it is how they defend it. They always present it as a choice or something that we consent to. This is the same thing as the apologists for wage slavery. Supposedly, we have a choice to work, and that is, you know, the contract, the labor contract is something two equal parts come together, there's consent, and therefore there can't be exploitation if there's consent. And even if there is, it doesn't matter. But what's that consent rooted in? If you were born into a working class family, what the fuck else can you do in order to survive, pay the bills, obtain the necessaries of life? What else can you do but work a job, a wage job, where you're necessarily going to be exploited for the vast majority of that time? There's literally no other option but death. How the fuck is that a choice? How am I consenting to something if the alternative either do it or die? There's no choice there. At best, what I have the choice is to decide who exploits me. What slave master am I going to pick? But that's really no choice at all. And that's very similar to the Aeon movie. What choice do the people that are forced to sell their life years in order to have at least a meagerly decent living standard for some years, what choice is that? That's no choice at all. That is honestly no choice at all. The only way to overcome this is through struggle. That's the only way to create a choice for yourself, to commit yourself to fighting for your class and at the same time fighting for humanity. So another important thing is the language that they use. They describe it as winning the lottery. This is a similar form of what I call linguistic whitewashing. It's the same thing as when our empire calls civilian deaths collateral damage. We hear collateral damage. Oh, you know, that's a technical term. Say it for what it is. It's fucking innocent civilians dying. Children and women and the elderly dying. That's what collateral damage is. Or when we call the fucking Syrian terrorists, the terrorists in Syria, when we call them moderate rebels, in order to legitimize their struggle against Assad, the political enemy that we had at the moment. No, they're fucking terrorists. They're fucking terrorists. It's terrorists when it's an inconvenience to empire. When it can be used by empire, it's moderate rebels. It's murder when it could be exploited by empire. It's collateral damage when it's done by empire. In relationship to work, the same thing is operative. In the gigafied economy of our day, they use the word flexibility for everything. Come work in fucking Uber, you have flexibility. Come work at this, you have flexibility. What does flexibility mean if not the capacity for the capitalist, like in sex, to screw you in more efficient and easier ways? Flexibility is just insecurity. Flexibility is just precarity. It's just the capitalist removing himself of any responsibility that he has towards you. Responsibilities that were won by centuries of struggles of working people that are now removed on the basis of calling you not an employee, calling you a fucking independent contractor. Again, another very lofty term. I'm an independent contractor, not a wage slave. And it's happening in a whole different host of industries. It's not just, like Uber and Lyft and shit. It's happening with rail workers. It's happening in a variety of different industries where working class people are beginning to be classified as independent contractors, so that this flexibility can take root, which just means that the capitalists can exploit you easier, dispatch you whenever they deem you to be unprofitable, and you're done. Any benefits that you can get as a working class person, results of the struggles that your class has waged for you, they're all removed. So the same thing, they describe this process as a lottery. Well, that's a similar linguistic whitewashing. And then the fact that this company, everything it's doing, which is completely unethical, is legal. Why is it legal? Well, because legality, the judicature in any society, is a reflection of the economically dominant class. Because there's no such thing as the state in general. The state is always a particular state. The state of a particular class that uses that state as an instrument to reproduce the current situation where that class is in a position of dominance. That's how it occurred in the slave democracies of the ancient world in Greece and Rome. That's how it occurred in the feudal societies, in the aristocratic societies. That's how it occurs in the current capitalist societies. It's a capitalist state, capitalist judicature. The laws are always going to be grounded in what benefits those who own private property, the capitalist class, and now more and more, the big monopoly capitalist class. That's why you can have, completely unethical things, such as the fact that they charge for cancer drugs like Imbruvica $16,000 a month. A drug it takes a very small fraction of that to produce, and that's literally a life-saving drug. They charge a price that only the ultra-rich can afford. How unethical is that? How irrational is that? Especially when these drugs are often developed through public funding, while privatizing the gains and leaving the vast majority of people to just fucking die. Like the 45,000 that die a year because they don't have health insurance. Any sane society would completely destroy this. But our institutions are the institutions of their class, of the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex. Just like in the Aeon, in the Paradise universe, the institutions are the institutions of the class that the Aeon company is a part of, the big monopoly capitalist class. This is, the essence of the modern state. And every time there's a new scientific development that can advance its exploitation and its process of capital accumulation, as Marx and Engels write in the German ideology, whenever through the development of industry and commerce new forms of intercourse have evolved, the law has always been compelled to admit them amongst the most modes of acquiring property. That's all the Paradise universe does. It allows, this new development for exploiting, for benefiting the rich, to have its proper place within bourgeois justice, within bourgeois legality. So, what Paradise does, as I mentioned in this article, is put a mirror up to our societies. It shows us through the medium of a technology we don't currently have, so that we can disconnect, our stereotypes and watching it, the barbarity operative in the logic of capital accumulation and the capitalist mode of life. It also shows us that we can fight back. I'm not going to get into it because I don't want to spoil the movie, but there's always resistance. The world that we live in is not eternal. It was not placed here by a god. It's not fucking human nature, as the people on the right want you to think. It is the development of human societies throughout history, specifically class societies. It came out of a certain series of contradictions within the feudal mode of life. It is pregnant itself with a different set of contradictions. And just like it came into existence, it will come out of existence and give way to a new mode of life. And if we study systematically and comprehensively the mode of life that we currently live in, we see that there is no which way possible for it to turn unless there's the common ruin of all of the contending classes and something akin to Rome, the complete implosion and destruction of that civilization at large, that mode of life. There's no other way for it to go other than socialism. We have the capacity to get rid ourselves of this dystopian barbarity that we live in. But it's something that we can do only if we come together. and fight as a class, also in unity with, the classes that are the friends of this universal emancipatory working class. If we come together and fight for the political power of our class, we can change this world. It's not eternal. We can do it. People have done it. All we have to do is look at China, look at Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, the DPRK. These countries have done it. They've engaged in the process of transforming that. There's still a long way to go. They're trying to carry forth these transformations in a world that's still dominated by capitalist imperialism, but it's a society qualitatively different from anything any of us who have grown up in the US or in the West have experienced. So that's Paradise. Make sure to check it out. It's one hell of a fucking movie. It's amongst the best movies that I've seen. Oh, I can't believe I kept this comment up the whole time. Thank you so much, Kyle, for the $5 super chat. We're going to have you back on pretty soon to give us these updates on the labor movement. Kyle's the Institute's official labor guy. I've watched this and it was very underrated, very cool. You reviewed it. Yeah, I hadn't heard of it, and I looked up. There was no reviews of it in any of the traditional socialist left publications. So I was very happy to review it, and I hope I did a good job in not giving spoilers so that people can go watch it and not know what to expect. At least in terms of stuff that's not the essence of the ideological critique in the movie. Okay, a lot of comments here. Let me go back up some of these guys. As the labor guy, many unions have before, but we are seeing a mass revitalization of the unions, especially in the Teamsters under O'Brien and the UAW under Fain. Absolutely. Let's see. Unnatural Causes is Inequality Making Us Sick. This is an excellent documentary. If you're on YouTube, I'll check it out. It sounds familiar. I think we might have talked about it at some point with Eddie. Stress is connected to all illnesses. Yeah, it absolutely is. You have to see Mate's book on it. It's tremendous. I mean, I think it shows pretty conclusively, scientifically, how that is the case. Let's see. Any other questions around here? Capital is parasite that drains the life of the people. Yes. 10-hour week, take it or leave it. That'd be pretty sweet. And it's necessary work. We're not talking about like you just fucking sit and eat chips for the rest of the week, and watch movies. I mean, if you want to do that. But most human beings will be extremely depressed if they work 10 hours a week and just eat popcorn and watch Netflix for the rest of the time. Like, people have this natural creative urge that's central to what it is to be human. What that free time is going to allow, especially if you provide the resources for people to do what they want to do and be creative, is, if you want to write short stories, you'll write short stories. If you want to paint, you'll paint. If you want to write books, you'll write books. If you want to read, you'll read. You'll do stuff, creative stuff. It'd be a beautiful society to live in. I'm so happy I left Miami when I did. It is such a capitalist show. Yeah, it absolutely is. In terms of consumerist culture, it's just absurd. I grew up in it. So, my middle and high school time were primarily dominated by concerns as to what pair of Jordan I would use for that day and all these other fucking ridiculous concerns that I shouldn't have had. Thanks for the crumbs, my lord. Yes. Let's see. Capitalist free will propaganda dog shit. The excellent documentary and yeah. A lot of comments. Okay. All right. So if you appreciated that, please do make sure to subscribe to the Substack, folks. I think even with free subscribers, we still get boosted in the Substack algorithm. So I'm going to put that in the chat. Make sure to subscribe for your boy. And if you have multiple emails, subscribe for multiple emails so that we can boost that Substack channel. If you have the capacity to donate $5 a month to get access to all the articles, make sure to do that. I'm writing, well, I've literally written an article for the last 10 days straight. But yes, so I'm debating as to whether I should do the next segment or leave it for tomorrow. I know that Noah was really appreciative of the absolute and triple exploitation article I did a while back, so I might I might call it here. I'll do one more short segment on the Twitter because Eddie covered it on TikTok, but I don't think we've covered it on the show, and I think it's important to talk about it. So let's watch one more TikTok from Eddie, react to it, and then we'll head out.
Recently, a bunch of big pro-Palestine accounts got banned from Twitter simultaneously. This includes professional journalists like Ken Klippenstein and Alan McLeod, as well as friend of the show Rob Rousseau and Zay Squirrel. And Elon responded to this saying, "I will investigate. Obviously, it is okay to be critical of anything, but it's not okay to call for extreme violence because it's illegal." And I highly doubt most of these accounts have been calling for extreme violence, especially like Alan McLeod. Like I said, he's a very professional journalist. And then Elon says, "For the record, I don't agree with your pro-Palestine views. Nonetheless, we support freedom of speech." So we've heard Elon talk a lot about freedom of speech, but we'll see if he puts his money where his mouth is here. As of now, all of these accounts have been reinstated, but they've lost all of their followers. So Alan McLeod had well over 100,000 before, and now he's at 380. Zay Squirrel, same thing. Now they're at 192. So we'll see if these accounts actually get their followers back, or if all of Elon's talk about free speech is just bluster. He got free speech for ethno-nationalists, but not supporters of Palestine, I guess.
So they have given the accounts back with all of the followers, but again, it was a result of the struggle. You know, it was hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of people asking for those accounts to be reinstated, and you know, it tells you that the speech that we have is not really a right. Something's not a right if they can be taken away so easily as soon as you become an inconvenience with that speech for the dominant narrative of the elite. A narrative that allows them to reproduce and order and to act in specific ways with certain events that lead to a lot of profit in their pocket at the end of the day. So you question these narratives, you're questioning the story that they present to people so that they consent to the activities that lead them to become extremely rich. So of course they're going to get mad and want to silence you. But often, you know, it has happened where after mass support, things can change and censorship can be curtailed, as I think it was in this case. This wasn't Elon Musk changing his mind about it out of nowhere. It was a shitload of people calling him out on the hypocrisy of him going on Joe Rogan and very dramatically talking about how much he respects free speech, and then allowing these forms of censorship of truth tellers. That's what's often left out. These are fucking truth tellers. Truth tellers, people that are challenging the bullshit, baseless narrative of the Zionist Nazi regime. So, very good for it to come back, and shout out to all the major voices that spoke out against this and that used their platform to speak out against the censorship at the threat of their own accounts being censored as well. So, all right. Midwestern Marks W. Yes. It really is so ridiculous how terms of service are so vague, so easily manipulated to sign and counter hegemonic critics. And they're long as shit. No one is going to sit down and read the terms of service before you decide to download and get an account on an app where you can post a sentence-long thought into in a picture or a video. Like who the fuck actually sits down and does that? It reminds me of this Netflix show where the lady signed one fucking terms of service paper, and in the terms of service was the capacity for people to secretly tape her life and make a show out of it with actors. And then so they made a Netflix show about what she was doing on a day-to-day basis, so that what she did today was tomorrow's show. But then they did it with the actress of the show as well. And it was this big sort of almost like Inception-like cycle of I think it was actually a Black Mirror episode. Now that I think of it, not its own show, it was a Black Mirror episode. But it's true, you know, like how many things do we sign on to that we don't read? And if we don't read and we sign on to them, well, you know, we know the holy spirit of bourgeois judicature is the contract. So we technically signed on to them. How do you escape that? So, you know, I wonder how much crazy shit is in the terms of service that we sign on to willingly. Will there be free speech? Is there free speech in China? There's free speech in China, a hell of a lot more than I think we have in the U.S. In a Marxist society, in the first stages, I would say that we need what Fidel described as everything within the revolution, outside of the revolution, nothing. There was no free speech for the loyalists of the British Crown after 1776. Those people were fucking kicked in their ass rightly. So the people that are down with counter-revolution, that want to use whatever resource they are left with in collaboration with imperialism to overthrow a people's socialist popular revolution, those people have no fucking right to free speech. But within capitalist society, we do have to be pro free speech. So everything has to be analyzed in terms of its context, time and space, as Stalin said. Thank you so much, Sean Moon, for the $10 super chat, brother. As you all know, it's a people's funded institute. We wouldn't be able to do a fraction of what we do without these donations. So this is extremely appreciated. David Graeber gave an excellent lecture in support of his book, Bullshit Jobs, at the Collège de France. I think it was called Revolt of the Caring Classes. Collège de France website, it's available. Thank you so much. I'm going to actually check that out. I've read I don't remember it being a book. Let's see. I remember it being a short essay. And I did read that maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It is a good thing. I don't think it's from what I recall, it wasn't a very materialist way of describing the phenomenon. But it is true. A lot of these jobs are bullshit jobs. Like you go to Walmart, there's a person that like scans your ticket. Often they don't even scan it. It's just like say hi to you and you leave. And 80% of the effort in the job is like emotional. They're like forced to smile at these people and then like tell them thank you, good morning, this. So it's a different form of like emotional drainage that they participate in. If I recall correctly, I think Graeber calls it like a new form of like emotional labor rooted exploitation or something like that. I might be conflating his work and some of other people's works, but yeah, I'll definitely check out that lecture. Let's see. No free speech regime on top. Yeah, in a socialist society. Fuck your capitalist free speech. We're prioritizing the people. Free speech has to be tied to truth telling. So it's not in this society. It's free speech if the shit you say aligns with the elite, and if you don't have the reach that can challenge them. You can say all sorts of crazy shit if you have 20 people following you. Even if you have like fucking 50,000 like we have on Instagram or something, or close to 45,000 like we have on YouTube. We could say all sorts of crazy shit within certain rational limits and not get censored. But once we get to a significant number of subscribers or followers or something like that, they're going to come after us. The accounts they came after had like 100,000 plus subscribers. So that's the dialectic we are faced with today. We have to engage with these outlets because they're perhaps the most important ideological fields of our day. You know, the place, locations where people get their ideas and shape their worldviews through. It's the, you know, setting for the battle of hegemony, you know, the war of positions in our modern day are one of the most important settings for that. But it's a setting that almost has like the capacity to just create a hole and just shoot you into the void whenever you start winning. But you're still forced to fight, which is, I think, somewhat unprecedented in terms of, you know, the ruling elite's control over an ideological field. So, yeah, we've seen some of that censorship in the place where we've been the largest, in the TikTok. Now we're at 160 something, 170 something K. It's led, of course, by Eddie. He's the general director, but also the director of that department of the Institute. But when we had a massive account of 400,000 people and we were reaching consistently millions of people, we got censored. And then we had 7 other accounts fully banned because we were doing the numbers that are scary. I don't think we're there yet, but we're building ourselves up to it once again. And we'll see, you know, hopefully not. Hopefully there's no censorship, but we'll see. Well, anyways, folks, it's getting late here. I have to hit the gym. It's been a marvelous stream. I have a couple topics that I'll pick up tomorrow, hopefully with Noah, specifically my recent article on absolute and triple exploitation to describe the process of profiting off of the selling of data. I know Noah was really appreciative for it. He is including quotes from it into his pamphlet on reproletarianization and the rise and fall of the American middle class. So I want to have that discussion on the article with him. But yeah, without further ado, thank you so much for being here, for watching, for liking, for subscribing, for sharing. If you haven't already, make sure you share, you like the stream. Thank you to those who are able to donate. Thank you to the brother Cal Pettis. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you to Sean Moon. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll head out as we always head in with the glorious and magnificent International. See you all next time.
and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.